Welcome to this collection of true and terrifying encounters shared by Reddit users. These stories delve into the chilling experiences that blur the line between reality and nightmare. As you listen, remember that these are not works of fiction, but real-life accounts that have left lasting impressions on those who lived through them. Story 1. The Unseen Stalker. It was a quiet evening when I decided to stay home alone, enjoying solitude. As the night deepened, I heard faint noises coming from the attic. Initially, I dismissed them as the house settling, but the sounds persisted. Curiosity got the better of me, and I ventured upstairs with a flashlight. To my horror, I discovered a hidden compartment in the attic floor. Inside, there was a small mattress and personal belongings. Someone had been living there, unbeknownst to me. The realization that an intruder had been silently inhabiting my home sent chills down my spine. Story 2. The Midnight Visitor. Living in a rural area, I often enjoyed the peace and quiet of the countryside. One night around midnight, I heard a knock at my door. Expecting a neighbor in need, I opened it to find no one there. Puzzled, I stepped outside and looked around but saw nothing. As I turned to go back inside, I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder. Spinning around, I found myself face to face with a stranger whose eyes were wide with terror. Without a word, he bolted into the night, leaving me shaken and confused. Story 3. The haunted hotel room. While traveling for work, I checked into a hotel known for its vintage charm. The room was quaint, with antique furniture and a large, ornate mirror. That night, I awoke to the sound of soft whispers and the distinct feeling of being watched. When I turned to look, the mirror reflected not just my own image, but also a shadowy figure standing behind me. I rushed out of the room and spent the rest of the night in the hotel lobby, too terrified to return. Story 4. The Vanishing Hitchhiker. Driving home late one evening, I noticed a lone hitchhiker standing by the roadside. Feeling a surge of compassion, I stopped to offer him a ride. He climbed in silently, his face obscured by a hood. As we drove, he spoke of strange occurrences and unsettling dreams. When I reached his destination, he simply vanished into the night without a trace. I later learned that a person matching his description had been reported missing years ago. Story 5. The Whispering Walls. Renovating an old house, I uncovered hidden messages etched into the walls. At first, they seemed like random scribbles, but upon closer inspection, they formed coherent sentences warning of impending danger. As I continued the renovations, I began to hear faint whispers emanating from the walls, repeating the same ominous messages. The unsettling experience led me to abandon the project, leaving the house to its eerie silence. Story 6. The Shadow in the Mirror. During a routine cleaning, I noticed a shadowy figure reflected in a hallway mirror. Thinking it was a trick of the light, I dismissed it. However, the figure appeared again, this time moving independently of my own reflection. Terrified, I covered the mirror and sought help. Experts suggested that mirrors could act as portals, and the entity might have crossed over. I later replaced the mirror, but the fear lingered. Story 7. The Disappearing Neighbor. A new neighbor moved into the house next door, a quiet man who kept to himself. Over time, I noticed strange occurrences, lights flickering at odd hours, the sound of footsteps when no one was around, and an overwhelming sense of unease emanating from his home. One day, he was simply gone. His house stood empty, with no sign of him ever having lived there. Neighbors reported similar experiences, but no one could explain the mystery. Story 8. The Crying Baby. Late one night, I was woken by the sound of a baby crying. Concerned, I checked the baby monitor, but my infant was sound asleep. The crying continued, growing louder and more frantic. I rushed to check on my child, only to find the room empty. Panicked, I searched the house but found no one. The crying stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving me shaken and confused. Story 9. The Phantom Train. While camping near an old railway track, I heard the unmistakable sound of a train approaching. Expecting to see headlights in the distance, I waited, but none appeared. The sound grew louder, and the ground trembled as if a train were passing by. Yet, there was no train in sight. The eerie experience left me questioning the boundaries between reality and the supernatural. Story 10. The Roommate Under the Bed. Living with a roommate, I thought I knew him well. One night, I heard strange noises coming from under my bed. Assuming it was a mouse, I ignored it. The next morning, I discovered that my roommate had been hiding under my bed, watching me sleep. When confronted, he admitted to doing this for weeks, claiming he wanted to feel closer to me. Disturbed and frightened, I moved out immediately. Story 11. The haunted fire escape. I was living in an old building in the city, one of those places with fire escapes that seem to creak with every gust of wind. One night, I was woken up by loud banging, as if someone was slamming a door. I got up to investigate and opened the window to look outside. The fire escape was shaking violently, but no one was there. As I stared out, a pale face suddenly pressed up against the window from the outside, its eyes wide with a terrifying expression of pure fear. I slammed the window shut and locked it, but the banging continued for hours. The next day, I found out that the fire escape had been removed months ago. Story 12. The whispers in the basement. My family moved into a house that was built in the 1800s. It had a huge basement, and at first, we thought it was a perfect place to soar with wings. However, every night, we would hear self-whispers coming from below. Thinking it was just the house settling, we ignored it. But one night, I decided to investigate. When I opened the basement door, the whispers stopped, but I heard a soft scratching sound coming from the corner. I went down with a flashlight and found nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in the shadows, watching me. I never went back down there after that. Story 13. A strange neighbor. We had a neighbor who was always too quiet, never spoke much. One day I noticed he was moving out, but he didn't seem to have much stuff. A few weeks later, the new tenants moved in, but something was off every night. We could hear furniture being dragged across the floor, loud footsteps, and even faint music playing. But the apartment was always locked when we knocked. After a while, I found out that our old neighbor had disappeared years ago, and the new tenants were the ones who had moved in after him. The most disturbing part was that they looked exactly like him. Story 14. The man in the attic. When I was a kid, I would sometimes hear strange noises coming from the attic. My parents would always tell me it was just the house settling, but one night I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate. I crept up to the attic door and the sound stopped. I opened it to find nothing but dust and old furniture. But when I went back downstairs, I noticed something strange. The attic ladder was down, and I was the only one at home. Story 15. The reappearing fingerprints. I bought an antique chair from an estate sale. It was beautiful, but strange things started happening when I placed it in my living room. Every morning, I would find fingerprints on the armrest, but no one had touched the chair. I tried cleaning it multiple times, but they always returned. One day, I left the chair in a room that I never used. When I came back, the fingerprints were gone, but in their place was a message written in dust. Leave now. Story 16. The cursed object. A friend of mine gave me an old, ornate mirror as a gift. She claimed it had been in her family for generations. After bringing it home, I started feeling an overwhelming sense of dread every time I looked into it. One night, I noticed something moving in the reflection. It was a shadow, but there was no one behind me. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling only grew stronger, as though the mirror was trying to pull me in. After a few weeks, I couldn't stand it anymore and sold it, but I swear I still feel its presence. Story 17. The phantom train. I was camping near an old railway track, well away from civilization. Late into the night, I heard a train whistle in the distance. Thinking I was imagining it, I ignored it, but the sound grew louder and the ground started to shake. I went outside to look for the train, but when I reached the track, there was nothing, just empty space. I heard the sound of the train passing by, but it was like it was happening in a completely different dimension. Story 18. The drowned girl. I was at the lake with my friends when we noticed a girl standing at the edge, staring out over the water. At first, we thought she was just lost or waiting for someone. But when we went closer, we realized something wasn't right. She was drenched, and her clothes were soaked as though she had been pulled from the lake. When we tried to speak to her, she turned and disappeared into the fog, but we could still hear her faint cries echoing across the water. Story 19. The creepy doll collection. I used to babysit for a family that had a collection of old dolls in their living room. One night, as I was sitting on the couch, I noticed that one of the dolls seemed to be staring directly at me. I thought it was a trick of the light, but the longer I looked, the more I felt as though its eyes were following me. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore and left. The next day, the family said that the dolls had always been that way, and they'd often find them moved in strange positions when they weren't looking. Story 20. The vanishing woman. I was driving down a quiet country road one evening when I saw a woman standing by the side of the road, waving her hand as if asking for help. I pulled over and asked if she needed a ride. She smiled but didn't say anything. As I glanced away for a moment to unlock the passenger door, moment she was gone. I looked around in confusion, but she had vanished into the night. I drove off, my heart racing, but I could still feel her eyes on me. Are you starting to feel the chill yet? These stories are just getting started, and we have more terrifying encounters to share. Have you ever experienced something that made you question what's real? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your creepy experiences. And if you're enjoying these spine-tingling tales, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on the next horror-filled chapter. Now, let's dive back into the fear. Story 21. The Midnight Caller. It was the dead of night when I received an unusual phone call. The voice on the other end was distorted, as though someone was speaking through a broken speaker. "I see you," the voice said, followed by a chilling laugh. I immediately hung up, but the phone rang again. This time, the voice was clearer. It said, "You shouldn't have answered." I checked the number. There was no record of it in my recent calls, just a strange, untraceable dial tone. Story 22. The Unwelcome Guest. I lived in a small, remote town, and one evening, I was staying home alone when I heard knocking at the door. I opened it, but no one was there. I shut the door, thinking it was a prank, but the knocking started again. This time, it was more frantic. I peeked out the window but saw nothing. The knocking continued, and that's when I noticed there was someone standing just beyond the porch light, staring directly at me. I called the police, but when they arrived, they found no trace of anyone. Story 23. The House on the Hill. The first night was fine, but as days went on, things started to get strange. Every morning, things in the house were moved: furniture, books, even small objects like keys. One night, I woke up to the sound of someone walking around the house. I checked, but no one was there. Then the whispers began. Faint at first, then louder, like they were right beside me. We moved out the next week, but I swear, I still hear those whispers at night. Story 24. The Man in the Window. I live in an apartment complex that overlooks a quiet street. One night, I noticed a figure standing in the window across from mine, staring directly at me. I tried to ignore it, but over the next few nights, the figure reappeared at the same time, never moving. One evening, I decided to confront it. I went across the hall, but when I knocked on the door, there was no answer. I opened it, only to find the apartment completely empty. The furniture was gone, as though no one had ever lived there. Story 25. The Unseen Hands. I was staying in an old guest house while traveling. The room I was assigned was dim and quiet, but I felt something wasn't right. As I sat on the bed, I felt a cold breeze brush against my neck, and then I felt it 2 icy hands resting on my shoulders. I turned around, but no one was there. Panicking, I ran out of the room and down the hallway, but when I looked back, the door was slowly closing on its own. I didn't stay another night. Story 26. The Vanishing Hitchhiker. I was riding late at night, far away from the city, when I saw a young woman standing by the side of the road, her thumb out. I pulled over and offered her a ride. She climbed in, said she was on her way home, and began talking about the cold weather. Suddenly, she fell silent, and I noticed she wasn't breathing. I pulled over and turned to ask if she was okay, but the seat was empty. I had been driving alone the entire time. Story 27. The Silent Watcher. I was working late one night when I looked out the window of my office building. There was a figure standing across the street, watching me intently. I dismissed it at first, but the figure didn't move. After an hour, I decided to go home. When I stepped outside, the figure was still there, but it wasn't standing anymore. It was now standing at the entrance to the building, facing the door. I hurried inside and locked it, but the figure never moved from its spot. Story 28. The Lost Child. During a camping trip in the woods, we heard a child cry nearby. We followed the sound, thinking a kid had gotten lost. We found a small figure standing by a tree, sobbing quietly. When we approached, the crying stopped. The figure turned to face us. It was a child, but there was something off about it. Its eyes were hollow, and its skin was pale, almost gray. We tried to ask if it was okay, but the child vanished into the trees, leaving us standing in stunned silence. Story 29. The Mirror That Trapped Me. I bought an old mirror from a yard sale. When I placed it in my bedroom, things started to feel wrong. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night, staring at my reflection in the mirror. Only it wasn't me staring back, it was someone else. A pale, shadowy figure was standing in the reflection, its eyes locked onto mine. I tried to look away, but my body wouldn't move. I could only watch as the figure's hand slowly reached out toward me. Story 30. The thing beneath the floorboards. I was living in a house that had creaky wooden floors. One day, while cleaning, I noticed something strange. There was a section of the floor that felt softer, as if there was something underneath. I pulled up the floorboard, only to discover a small, dirt-filled compartment with old, decaying bones. As I looked closer, I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I quickly covered it up and left the house, but I still hear scratching noises under my floor to this day. Story 31. The blood-stained pillows. I was staying at a friend's house when I woke up in the middle of the night, covered in blood. At first, I thought it was a nightmare, but when I looked at the pillow, there were actual bloodstains. Panicking, I checked my body, but there was no sign of injury. I went to my friend's room to ask if they had noticed anything strange, but when I opened the door, they were gone. Their bed was covered in the same bloodstains, but there was no trace of them anywhere. Story 32. The unseen footsteps. I live in a house that's over 100 years old, and at night, I would hear the sound of footsteps coming from the hallway. It was always the same pattern, 3 slow steps, followed by a pause. I would get up to investigate, but no one would be there. One night, I decided to set up a camera to see what was going on. The footage revealed a shadowy figure walking down the hall, but no one was physically present in the house. Story 33. The cold breath. I was in the kitchen one night when I felt a sudden chill, as though the temperature had dropped dramatically. I thought it was just the air conditioning, but then I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, but there was no one there. The temperature dropped even further, and I could hear a faint whisper, just barely audible, "Get out." I ran out of the house, but the cold lingered in my mind long after. Story 34. The mysterious shadow man. I was walking home one evening when I saw a man standing in the distance. He was tall, with a long coat, but his face was completely shadowed. As I got closer, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I looked away for just a second, but when I looked back, he was gone. The most disturbing part was that I couldn't remember the exact spot where he had been standing. It was as if he had never existed. Story 35. The disappearing child. One evening, I was sitting in my living room when I saw a child standing by the window, staring out. The kid had an expression of deep sadness, as if they were waiting for someone. I went to speak to them, but when I opened the door, the child vanished, and the room felt freezing cold. I later found out that a child had disappeared from the neighborhood years ago under similar circumstances. Story 36. The old woman in the mirror. I was staying at a friend's house when I noticed an old mirror on the wall. The reflection showed not just me, but an elderly woman standing behind me. I quickly turned around, but no one was there. I asked my friend about the mirror, and they told me that it had been in their family for generations and was said to be haunted. I didn't believe them until I saw the woman's face again, this time closer and smiling. Story 37. The room with no door. I was walking through an old part of town when I saw a house with a doorless room in the window. Curious, I tried to get closer, but the door wouldn't open. There was no handle, just a blank white surface where the door should have been. I asked the homeowner about it, but they claimed there was no room there at all. I later found out that the house had been abandoned for years. Story 38. The midnight knock. I was in bed when I heard a knock at the door. It was 3 a.m. and I wasn't expecting anyone. I checked the peephole, but no one was there. The knocking continued, louder now, as if the person was getting more impatient. I opened the door, but there was no one in the hallway. I closed the door and turned around, only to find someone standing in the shadows of my living room. Story 39. The footprints in the snow one winter morning. I woke up to find fresh footprints leading up to my front door, despite the fact that I hadn't seen anyone leave. The footprints were large, and the snow around them was untouched. I followed the trail, which led me to the woods behind my house. But when I turned back, I noticed the footprints continued toward my door, as if someone had been watching me from the woods. Story 40. The silent forest. I was hiking through a remote forest when I noticed something strange. There was no sound. Not a bird, not a breeze, not a single rustle in the trees. As I walked deeper into the woods, I began to feel like I was being followed. I turned around to see nothing but trees. When I returned to my car, I realized I couldn't remember the way back. The forest had somehow changed, and I had wandered into a place that didn't exist on the map. That's it for today's terrifying tales, but remember, fear doesn't end here. If any of these stories left you questioning what's lurking in the shadows, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your own spine-chilling encounters in the comments below. We want to hear your stories. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss another haunting episode. Stay safe, stay alert, and as always, keep an eye on the things that go bump in the night. See you in the next one.